Welcome to Babies from Beyond, the podcast that gives all babies a voice, whether they are still in spirit or already earthside. I'm Lauren Dionysius, a former registered NICU nurse turned baby soul communicator, and I'm here to share the wisdom of today's babies to guide you on your motherhood journey. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about foster care. There's also a lot of overlaps when it comes to adoption as well, but I'm feeling to do a separate episode on adoption because while there are many similarities why souls would choose to come into foster care, and also adoption has a slightly different energy around it as well. So I'm feeling to do a separate episode. But this episode, where I focus on foster care, I'm going to talk about the journey of a foster baby that I supported for a few weeks while helping out his foster family, and the wisdom and the messages that he taught me about being born or starting life in that way. I'm also going to talk about why a soul would choose to come and be separated from their biological parents, especially under what we would call difficult situations, which is what happens when a soul goes into foster care. I also want to touch on why childhood experiences are so important for the soul's journey to the earth, and also look into the benefits of foster care for the soul, because we tend to label foster care as bad or unlucky or unfortunate or poor child or all of these things. But what I've learned from the soul's perspective is that all of our life situations, good, bad, and everything in between, do have the potential to offer some really profound insights and guidance, but also growth for the soul during their journey here on earth. So I've had to learn not to be so quick to judge these experiences, and instead to dive a little deeper and just feel more into why these things may be happening on that higher perspective or bigger picture that we usually don't even think to consider. So first I want to talk about a little foster baby that I, through some very synchronistic circumstances, I guess, I came to care for. So this little boy, he was about 6 weeks old when I met him. He was born biologically to a mother who had severe mental health issues that escalated towards the end of her pregnancy. And so from birth, this little boy was placed into a foster family by child safety. And again, through a series of synchronicities and alignments, I was asked to help out this foster family with this young baby, because they also had older children that they were fostering as well. So as I said, he was around 6 weeks old when I first met him. And energetically, by this point, I had become very familiar with the energy of babies and how their energy fields are very, very different to that of adults. And as I was caring for him, which was basic newborn care, so feeding, bathing, changing, settling, putting to sleep, all of these things. And the first thing I noticed from this little boy when I first met him is that he was very energetically shut down. Even though a baby's soul or a baby's energy field is generally a lot lighter than an adult's, because they have been on the earth for less, so they have picked up less. There's less clutter or debris in their energy field compared to an adult's, which can be quite dense. He actually felt a lot more distant and a little bit too light compared to most babies, even of this age, that I'd cared for in the past. And interestingly though, there was a lot of fear in his energy field and confusion, but his way to deal with that energetically, or to adjust to that, was just to shut down and to kind of disconnect from his environment, from his experience of the earth from people around him. And I felt his soul was just so disconnected from his little human body. And it was so sad for me to feel him like that. It's like the lights were on, he was doing all the things, even developmentally, he was on track. But he was like this little empty shell. And he also had a lot of fear around going to sleep, and he was actually quite difficult to get to settle. And he would wake very, very easily and very quickly, and had a very short sleep cycle, to the point I don't think he really was able to establish a sleep cycle, especially in those early months. So as I continued to care for this child, and it was just for one day a week over a period of a few months from memory, and I began to learn a lot from him around his journey and why he chose to have this start in life. And I've come to believe, not just through him, but with so many babies I cared for in the nursery. We had a lot of babies, unfortunately, that before they were even born had a child safety alert attached to their file, that we needed to take action for different ways, different reasons, for different circumstances, different families. But they taught me a lot, these children, around why they would choose to be born biologically to a mother or a couple and then be separated from their birth parents under these difficult situations. You know, child safety was never slapped on the file of a healthy family, right? So as I continued to care for this little child, he taught me that he was afraid. He understood on the soul level, at least energetically, that he had been separated from his biological mother. He helped me to understand that he needed to come into a foster family for the next chapter of his journey. And while there was the fear and the confusion there was also an acceptance for him on the soul level that this was part of his journey. I've never come across a baby who was surprised when they end up in foster care, or for adoption for that matter as well, which I'll get into in another episode. So there was a knowing that this is how it was going to be, but also, as I said, this fear and this uncertainty, and there was a deep wound there for him that I could feel already around not being with his mother. And it was a sense of abandonment, rejection, not feeling like he belonged anywhere, even though this foster family were beautiful and were doing everything they could to support him. There were other foster kids in the family, and he was feeling a little on the outer, like he hadn't adjusted to being in this different family. They were all unfamiliar to him. He didn't know their voices. He didn't recognize them, didn't know their energy. They were essentially strangers to him, at least on the human level. Even though, as I said, his soul did have an understanding and an expectation that this would be his path in life. So as I continued to look after him, I just asked him so many questions. I'm sure he was like sick of me by the end of my time caring for him. But asking him like why he chose this, like why he wanted to start life in this way. And he told me that he'd had a lot of experiences in other lifetimes where he felt disconnected, where he felt confused, where he didn't have a good family upbringing or a strong connection with his parents, even in times where he stayed with them. So he shared that just because you stay with your biological parents or family doesn't automatically mean a sense of belonging or connection or support or love or care, like all of these things. So for him, his soul this time wanted to have a different experience of that. He wanted to also, on the soul level, start to have more of a healing journey around this wound, but also that he also needed to pierce that wound or to establish that wound early in this life in order for him to move through it and grow through it. Because if he had been born into a very, like a highly functional conscious family that loved him unconditionally and he was very connected and supported, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to explore these wounds. He wouldn't have been able to understand what it was like to feel abandoned and to feel rejected by his parents. And so, as hard as it can be for us to understand on the human level, those childhood experience, well, for him and for many of us, really set us up for our journey ahead and for the lessons or the growth that we come here to learn. And while hard to understand, we do often need to have the experience of those situations early in life to then give us the opportunity and the choices to learn and grow and heal through them. Because as I said, if we don't have that, how can we truly learn? How can we truly grow? Because it's through experience and emotions and energy and situations that we grow, not from reading a book, watching others. So that was a big part of what he shared with me around his journey. But his ability to adjust to that in human form was a little skewed. It was a little challenged. As I said, he was quite disconnected and quite distant. But it was also his way of dealing with his experience as well and trying to make sense of it. So I actually worked a lot with him during the time that I worked with him, supporting his energy field, explaining to him what was going on. And this is one of the simplest things we can do for any baby, any child, regardless of the situation. It doesn't need to be as complex and as difficult as this little boy that I'm talking about, but we completely underestimate their ability to be able to understand their environment and their surroundings. They know so much more than what we give them credit for, but they don't understand what's going on an energetic level. They feel it, they sense it, but there's no connection made there or no understanding of that. And so one of the simplest things that we can do for babies right from preconception all the way through pregnancy, birth, that newborn phase, older babies and children, is to explain to them what's going on because they feel it anyway. And that's what I found with this little boy. He could feel everything that was going on. He just didn't understand it. So over a period of weeks, I worked with him to explain what had gone on, explain what happened in the later, I think from memory, it was the last month or 6 weeks of his pregnancy with his biological mother. I explained what had gone on. I explained that it wasn't his fault. I explained what happened when he was born and why he was suddenly no longer with this mother or with this woman that he had essentially known for that first 8 months of his journey to Earth, and explaining to him what was going on, explaining to him the processes now and this family that he was with now and why he was with this, to look after him in the short to medium term, to make sure that he was fed and was sleeping and had a safe space to live and stay. And I will say with this, I know this isn't true for all foster families, but I can absolutely say hand on heart, with this foster family I worked with, their hearts were so beautifully in the right place. And the foster mother had actually been through the system herself as a child. So what she was doing for this little boy and also the other children in her care was beautiful, a beautiful act of service on the soul level and the human level to support these children, because she really knew their struggles from firsthand experience. And what I found with this little boy, just talking to him, just explaining to him what was going on, what was happening, is his energy just naturally started to shift. I could feel it. I wasn't doing anything special. I wasn't doing anything particularly intuitive. I was just explaining to him, just helping him to understand, just orientating him to the earth and what was going on in his little life. And over a period of weeks and months, he started to just land more in his body. And that naturally happens generally the longer we're here on Earth, but not always. And we can make it easier just by explaining what's going on. And as I continued to ask him about his journey and also his fear around sleeping as well, what he shared with me is that One of his earliest memories that was imprinted on his soul, on his energy field in his short life, was sleeping in a cot near his mother. And then when he woke up, she was no longer there and he was in a different place. And that was the original wound for him. That was that initial split, that initial trauma, that initial shock for him in this life. And even just through that, he developed this fear of sleep, this fear of change, this fear of something happening while he was sleeping, this fear of waking up and not knowing where he was, who he was with. And what did happen, and what I noticed as I continued week after week putting this child to sleep and all the other care that came with supporting him, is that I learned, again, just by helping him to understand what was going on, to reassure him, to ask his guides to come and support him while he was sleeping, just to give him that extra support and extra reassurance that he was going to be okay, that he was going to wake up in the same house, in the same bed, the same cot, in the same location that he went to sleep in, whether that was 20 minutes earlier or 2 hours earlier, 3 hours earlier. And I noticed like how much more lighter his energy field came, how much more adjusted he came to the earth, how much more peaceful his energy field became, how much that fear softened in his energy. And he began to feel more adjusted to the earth plane and more safe to be here. Because that's a huge thing, not just with babies and newborns, but with all of us. The main thing I'm learning, at least in my experience and working with others, is our need for safety in the world and how often we don't feel safe, whether that's physically, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, on all levels. And this is one thing that we can really do for babies and to support them. So after a few months, my journey with this little boy came to an end. He was meeting all his milestones. He was settling more. He was sleeping more. His feeding, it did wobble a little bit, and we did need to make some changes during the time I was with him. But generally, he was eating well and sleeping well, with the normal baby moments. It wasn't all smooth sailing. But I remember the last time that I cared for him and just holding him. Like, I get quite attached to the babies that I care for, and I wished him all the best. I wished that he had a beautiful life ahead of him and that he could always feel safe and supported. And I asked his spirit team to come and be with him, to be with his energy, to help him to know that he was safe, that he was loved, that he was never alone, which are 3 things that I say to all babies and also all souls. We need to know that we're safe. We need to know that we're loved, and we need to know that we're not alone on our journey here on earth. And I remember as I told that to him, and I was just holding him on my chest. He'd just had a feed, and I'd held him upright on my chest, and his whole body just softened. His whole body just like melted with this sense of ease and this sense of peace and just an understanding of what was going on. And again, as I said, this is something so simple that we can do. Sorry, I know that I've digressed a little bit here by talking about this baby, but I do want to bring this conversation now back to foster care. And as I'd mentioned with him, he really needed to have the start in this life for his soul's growth around those primary wounds. Difficult to understand for most of us humans through our mind, but very, very profound on the soul level. So, a question I often ask is, why would a soul choose to come and be separated from their biological parents, especially under what we would call like really difficult situations? Like, why wouldn't we just be born to decent families or helpful and loving parents? And I've already touched on this a little bit, but, it can really help to bypass family issues. By this little boy being born to a mother that really struggled with mental health issues, and being placed into a family that, from all I could see and in my experience, like working with families, I didn't notice any major mental health issues there. So automatically taking him out of that environment can help to break intergenerational patterns that he may have really struggled to break if he had been born into and stayed with his biological parents. Because if he was born into kind, loving, generous parents and he's come from a soul history, say, of mental health issues or substance abuse or whatever it may be, then being born into a family where those situations are not established early and those wounds are not pierced early, it just masks it with trauma patterns or generational trauma. It won't give that opportunity for growth and healing and release, because what we resist persists, right? Whereas if something comes up for us really strongly, we have an opportunity to really lean into that with curiosity and compassion and to make different choices and make changes. But it's always the choice of the human as well as to whether they make those changes and take up the new opportunities. But these situations can really offer souls a very powerful opportunity to do that. So, and as I mentioned, like the soul is always looking to learn and to grow. We don't come to Earth for a joyride, in my experience. We don't come to take the easy route. We come to dig deep and to experience different parts of being a human, but also to have the full spectrum of human experiences, the good and the bad. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who has had a simple, easy life with no problems at all. I think we have different problems in different areas of our lives, depending on what we come here to learn, but I've never come across anyone who has no problems. But I do think that some souls do choose to learn some really hard lessons in life. And being separated from the family of origin is really one of these hard lessons. Just that wound of rejection, abandonment that is so strong. And I just want to say too that we don't need to have begun our life in this way for those wounds to be there either. It's just having an experience like this at the beginning of our life can really add some oomph and some energy behind these wounds, which some of us may need, some of us may not. I also find too, and just coming back to this little boy, these lessons that we come to learn and grow through and these wounds that we come to explore, they can be on the individual soul level, but also on the collective level. So this healing journey for many of us is very individual and very different from others. The learnings and the growth are different. The situations and experiences are different. The lessons are different. But many souls also choose to incarnate to support the transformation or to transmute these wounds on the systemic level. So when it comes to foster care, for example, we all know of situations that we've heard in the news or through our own network around babies being born into what we would call the system. And also how many of these children and their experiences, again, hard to understand on the human level, but looking at the soul's perspective and the greater picture of humanity, these experiences and circumstances also highlight problems in the system, which then gives the opportunity to create new policies and procedures, interventions, protocols, things like this to improve the system. Even though, it's taking time, right? It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But it can be important in that collective energy. And there are souls, as I said, who are putting their hands up to support that, to contribute to that. And I just want to finish this episode just by sharing some of the gifts that I've learned from not just this little boy that I was caring for in foster care, but many other babies I cared for in the nursery who were going through that that system or were about to enter that system. And the things they shared with me around why their souls chose that is they wanted to come here to learn about independence, to be more autonomous, to be able to rise above their situations and their surroundings, to make different choices, to explore different dimensions, often really challenging dimensions around interpersonal relationships with others and dealing with other people, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. As I already mentioned, like really giving themselves an opportunity to explore these core wounds around rejection, abandonment, neglect, especially from their family of origin, but also understanding that their family of origin were just playing a role, were just actors in their play. It's not about beating up on the parents or judging the biological parents for their actions. They're all on their own soul journey, and that's different for everyone. But acknowledging the role that these biological parents played in the soul's journey for these children. And as I mentioned, these experiences, these situations, which I'm learning to see, and I will emphasize that it's something I've needed to learn, it's something that didn't come naturally to me, is learning how the soul or the human who's attached to that soul learns to or chooses to deal with these experiences and situations. Some foster children really struggle to break free from these wounds. They can turn to substances or even violence to deal with it. They can become stuck in the victim mentality or become like a revolving door of the system and go on to have their own children who become part of the system. So some souls are unable to break free from these wounds, and sometimes it can take us a few lives to be able to do this. It's not just a one-time gig for many of us, especially with these really deep core wounds. Others that go through the system, like I mentioned with the foster mother who was caring for this little baby that I was supporting them with, she went through the system and just in her own world, she created profound changes in the system by going back into the system as a foster mother to support this next generation of kids who would be placed into foster care. Because what an incredible gift that she and many others in her situation are able to offer this next generation of foster children. Again, giving them a deeper understanding and compassion that they may not have been able to experience with, say, a family that had not had that first-hand experience. And again, these are generalizations. Each soul's journey is very, very different. So I'm feeling to leave this episode here. I feel like there was a lot to this, and I understand that it can be a very challenging topic and something that can be very difficult to understand through our human minds and to make peace with that, especially if it's been part of your own journey in some way as well. So I want to acknowledge the difficulty of that. And I know for my own journey, I've needed to separate at times the soul's journey or their plans for this life or what they came here to experience in that bigger picture, and really separate that from the human experience. Because while the soul may have these plans from a very high vibration and from a very wise place, at the end of the day, it's us humans that need to execute that plan and to live out the experiences and in many ways the consequences of that soul's plan, which isn't easy at all. In fact, what I've come to learn is the most powerful lessons for the soul on their journey to Earth are actually the most brutal for the human to experience physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, energetically, and also to integrate and process and begin to heal from. But as I said, they're also the most profound. So yeah, today was a big episode, so be gentle with yourself. It's really important to, as you go through your journey, wherever you are, to reach out for the support that you need in the time that you need it Thank you for tuning in to Babies from Beyond. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to leave me a review just wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, head over to Instagram and give me a follow at Born Energy, and check out the show notes for more ways that you can connect with your baby's soul, including one-on-one readings and online programs to support you. Until next time, trust your journey and your baby. Take care.